the transaction processing systems are information that process the data. So traditional method of data entry was through the end users of the information system who capture the data on source document, some book or diary. So batch processing is nothing but making the task into several batches and making it implemented in the information system. Hello students, welcome to the next session of Management Information System. I am Dr. Soumyashri from Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram College. In this session, let's know about the transaction processing system. As you know, the definition of transaction processing system and what it is going to do has been explained in the first module, isn't it? But with this module, we study in detail about what is the transaction processing system, why do we need it, how can we perform or how can we store the transaction in the transaction processing system. Let's start this session. Okay, as we know, the transaction processing systems are information that process the data. It is the process where the data is stored by using the different business transactions. You are taking care of all the transaction that is happening in a business. Now the thing is, what are the transactions that are going to be happened in a business? What we use or what we consider as a transaction. Now we have the thing known as sales, where the product will be sold to a customer. Purchasing the raw material from a seller, then deposits. If a customer deposits the money, it will go to the account of the organization. So the deposit can be considered as a transaction, and the withdrawal. Somebody withdraws or you have to withdraw the amount to give it to the seller of the raw material. That is again a transaction. Then we have refunds. So if the customer is taking the product on credit transaction, now we have to, the person may refund the amount that has remained in the transaction that was not completed during the previous transaction. That will be considered as a transaction. Then we have the payments, different payments that can be used. Like we have to pay, like we have purchased the raw material on the credit. Now we have to pay that amount to the seller of the raw material, isn't it? Again, it is also a transaction. So these are the sum of the transaction that we consider in a transaction processing system. So example you can give is the data generated whenever a business or whenever an organization is going to sell a product to the customer on credit basis. Okay, so when the customer takes the product on credit basis, you will involve the components such as customer, the product, the salesperson, and the inventory or the stock. These are the components that will be involved in a transaction of selling a product to the customer on credit basis. Okay, and if you look at the detailed transaction in this, these are the main transactions: getting the customer details, getting the product details, the salesperson details, the stock details is the main transactions that can happen. Along with that, the main transaction causes additional transactions such as credit checks, the customer billing, inventory changes in the stock, and increase in the accounts and the receivable balances. Accounts receivable balance, how much has been received and how much is remaining to be paid by the customer. All those details will form another set of transaction, okay, which generate additional data to the current transaction. Now the transaction processing activities are going to capture such kind of data or the operations of the business world, which must be taken care, like smaller transactions are needed to be captured and stored in the database so that the business runs smoothly without any hindrance in that. Okay, so therefore the TPS has an important role in case of the information system. Without the TPS, none of the other system can work, because each and every transaction that is going to happen in an organization will be stored and processed by the transaction processing system only. This is the foundation or base of the other information systems. In the transaction processing system, we have different stages in the cycle of a TPS. The first thing is entering the data into a particular format, like data entry activities is to be maintained in the information system. The next thing is the transaction processing activities. The first step is we have collected the data. Along with that, we have to process the activities, not only storing. Processing of the activities is also at most important in the case of business transaction. Okay, processing the data that have been stored into a categorizing it into a different formats, then storing them in the form of a file or in the database. Okay, database will contain different tables or boxes. Like we say, tables or tables, we say the informations or data collected will be categorized and are stored in a proper location for the processing. Once processing and storing of the data has been over, next thing is preparing the document as a report. So why do you need document is, management may ask for the details of the transaction that happened in this annual year, financial year. So how do you decide what is the profit, what is the loss? So the management cannot view the system, okay, what is the each and every transaction of each and every department and get the details. What they want is the detailed report of the everything, as well as the combined report of all the transaction that will tell them what are the strategies and plans you have implemented, how much was the sales, how much was the profit that we got in the previous financial year. So for this, we make use of the reporting tools, which is the next step, that is document and report generation. So that is the next thing. Then we have the enquiry processing activities. So now it is enquiry processing, last step. So what was the steps that are taken in the last year? If the profit was more, what were the improvised plans that has been implemented last year? And can we continue it, or we have to change the strategies and plans? Must be decided by the management, isn't it? And if else the profit has been decreased, what is the cause of the decrease in the profit? Whether it was the failure of the plan, whether the strategy was not perfect, whether the market condition was not good. So inquiring about all these things, what was the reason for all the thing that happened in the last financial year will be inquired by the management using the reports generated by the stored data in the database. So this stored data be collected and segregated from the data entry and processing activities. So the entire transaction processing system will carry out these steps repeatedly for getting the in-depth view or the view of the transaction that happened in the last financial year. All right. So the first step in these cycles is the data entry process. What we need or what we are going to do in the data entry process? The input activity is the main thing in the data entry process. Okay, it involves the processing and storing of the data. In this, we are going to collect the data from the recording. We record the transaction in the form of a file so that we can make it arranged in a particular manner, or we can take it as in the form of a code, or we can edit the collected information to a particular format. Okay, data may be converted to a form that can be entered into a computer system. All the data will not be in a proper form, so that you can enter everything directly into the computers. What the data processing will do is, it will take the data and format it to a particular form so that it can be directly stored into the computer system. You can take the data from multiple entries like online data entry. Customer, if you have online user interface for the customer, he may put the request through the online. So it will be, data will be collected through online. Offline data entry, customer may come to our office desk and say that I want to purchase this, and can purchase the product, which is an offline data entry without the help of the computers or internet. Data capture, capturing the production department's activities, again is a data entry process. Copy paste services, which is already there in the file, which was before the establishment of the information system through computers. There may be physical files, copying and pasting those data into the information system, again is a data entry process. Then book data entry, the details may be stored in the form of a book. So data entry will be done from the book. Then image data entry, like customer details, employee details, supplier details will be stored along with the person's photograph, or the documents like maybe Aadhaar card, PAN card, all those things will be in the form of an image. So image data entry. Then document data entry, what are the documents, different permissions from the government departments, that will be in the form of a document. So document data entry we are doing. Then PDF form of data entry, like some of the reports will be in the form of a PDF. So you can use or you can store the data in the form of a PDF. That is the data entry process. It has always been a problem getting the data into computers. Why it is problem is, you need to have the accurate data. You can't go with the ambiguous data that this may come to this category or maybe that category. You have to decide which is the category to which this data has to belong. Okay, whether the details must belong to customer 1 or to the sales details. You have to accurately recognize the form of data, and in a lesser time, quickly you have to recognize it to match the processing speed. As we know, computer processors work in enormous speed. We cannot match with the speed of the processor, but we have to try to get an accurate and a quick data entry to the system. Okay, these methods are more efficient and reliable and are known as the source data automation. We are automating the data from the source. We are taking the data from the source itself. Okay, next is, how do you do the traditional data entry? So the traditional method of data entry was done on the end users. Okay, who are the customers, end users of an information system. That is the receptionist, the clerks, the managers, the entry operators, data entry operators. So these are the end users of the information system, isn't it? So traditional method of data entry was through the end users of the information system, who capture the data on source document, some book or diary, such as purchase order, they will follow the purchase order application. Payroll timesheets, what was the time? If it is a production department, what was the time of entry of the employee? What was the time of the exit of the employee? Using that timesheet, on hourly basis, the payment will be done. So it will be payroll timesheets and sales order form. The customer gives a sales order for the organization. So the receptionist or a clerk will enter the details of sales order by the customer in the form of a hard copy or in the form of a paper document. Now, the source documents are subjected to the different data entry activities. We have the source document, which is a written one. Now, we have to make this enter into the computer or information system. So, how can we do this? We have a set of activities for doing this. The first step is data is converted into a machine, readable medium, which is readable by the machine and is understandable by the machine, such as magnetic tape, which is stored into a magnetic tape, or magnetic disk. We are storing it in the form of using a software, usually maybe in a Excel. Okay. Then typically this means using such devices can get you the data from the disk or the memory storage. Okay. The data from source documents, if they are in the form of a written document, could alternatively be directly entered into the computer system. You can directly enter the details into the computer system using a direct input device. What we'll do is, we'll keep the written document with us, look at the details and enter all the details through the keyboard and mouse using some of the input device. As we know about the input device like scanner, keyboard, mouse. So what we do is, if you have a barcode for the product, when you scan the barcode, the details will be stored through the input device, that is barcode reader. You can directly enter the document details through the input device without the use of machine readable media. We don't need any readable media. You can directly enter the details through one of the input device. Okay. Now the thing is, what are the sources of data automation? How can we get the data into the systems? Okay. For this, we use the automated methods. What are these automated methods of data entries are? The source data automation uses several methods that have been made or developed to have the automation process incorporated in the information system. They are all based on trying to reduce. What has to be reduced or what has to be eliminated is the manual intervention in the storage of the data, or data entry process will be automated so that the human intervention is reduced effectively, which reduces the percentage of the errors as well, increases the quality of the data that is stored. So the intention of the automation is to reduce the human intervention in the data entry methods. Alright. Then we have a term known as batch processing. So batch processing is nothing but making the task into several batches and making it implemented in the information system. So the transaction processing system processes the data in two basic ways. What are the different ways? One is batch processing. What does the batch processing step will do is, transaction data is accumulated. It is accumulated over a period of time. We'll go on, we don't enter the details as it comes to us, but we wait for set of documents. It will be accumulated over time and processed periodically. What I will do is, whenever there is a sales order, I will not enter directly into the computer, but instead I will take the written document of the sales order At the end of the day, I'm going to enter these details at once into the computers. This is one method of batch processing. Apart from that, we have the real-time processing. What is this real-time processing? The data is processed immediately after a transaction occurs. Whenever a customer comes to me, if I am a receptionist or I am a clerk in the sales department or a salesperson, whenever a customer approaches me for purchasing a product, and instead of taking that in a written document, I will directly enter the details into the computer and take the printed form of the entered details. Both the things are possible, isn't it? We'll have a written document and we enter the details into the computer. This is one method. Another method of transaction is we directly enter into the computer and take the hard copy of that, print of that written entered document into the computer, which is called as the real-time processing. This is the batch processing where data entry will be done in the particular period of time, not every time. Okay, real-time processing is entering the data as and when it comes to us. Okay, so the transaction processing systems make heavy use of the batch processing. Sometimes the persons who are using the computers may not be comfortable with the use of the computers. Therefore, they'll follow the batch processing system itself. Okay. Along with this, the batch processing activities can be termed as the gathering of the source documents. The person gathers the source documents originated by the business transaction like sales and purchase, sales order and invoice into groups called as batches based on the time, maybe day, maybe on week or maybe on fortnightly or maybe on monthly basis. The sales order may be made into a batch. So this is also possible. Recording the transactions data on an input medium such as magnetic disk or magnetic tape, directly storing using the real-time processing. Both the things are possible in a data entry process. Okay. The next thing is sorting the transactions. In a batch processing, we have to sort the transaction in a transaction file in the same sequence as the records in a master file. It will be coming from the reception, what are the sales and the purchase. We have to sort the transaction according to what the sequential master file is telling based on the time and date of the activity. Processing the transaction data in the system and creating an updated master file, getting all the data in one file and a variety of documents and reports, collecting these documents and reports at once in the form of a master file is needed to generate a report. Then, if you go to the real-time processing, what happens in a real-time processing in the TPS is it processes the transaction data immediately instead of making it batches and entering it into the computer or the information system. It directly or immediately processes the transaction data once the transaction is over, and they are generated and can provide immediate output to end users. So what they will do is they will enter all the details in the sales order form in a batch processing, and they will wait for a time period, say end of the day, enter all the details and is submitted to the database. That means if a manager wants to see what is the amount of sales that has been done in this day, he has to wait until the end of the day or the next day to know the details of the transaction and in that department. But in the real-time processing, you can get the result of the transaction as soon as possible. The data is entered because the data or the transaction is processed and is stored immediately in the information system, which can provide the immediate output to the end users. Maybe the manager can get the details of the transaction as quickly as possible, that is as quickly as the entry in the information system finishes, isn't it? So the data is fed directly into the computer system instead of taking a written document and making it enter the details into the system. What does the real-time processing will do is, it will directly feed the data into the computer system from online terminals. So server will be connected through the internet or intranet. Intranet is within the organization. Okay. From online terminals without being stored, and it is always stored online in direct access files. It is stored in online in a cloud or in a remote server so that you can access those data at any time and anywhere. So the real-time processing has been proved to be more beneficial than the batch type of processing in the transaction processing system. Along with that, the files and databases in the real-time processing always will be updated, will be upgraded. That means details will be entered as soon as the transaction occurs. So the details in the database will always be updated, and whenever data is originated, regardless of its frequency, you can get the immediate information from the real-time processing. Along with that, the real-time processing depends as telecommunication networks, but one of the disadvantage of real-time processing is it depends on the network of the online terminals and computers. So you are connecting to a remote server from my computer. If my computer gets crashed or the network gets disconnected, I cannot update the data from my system in a real-time processing. But in case of other side, if the system or network in the server's side will get corrupted, if the network is not working in that side, then also I cannot update the data in a real-time processing. So now what is the question is real-time processing good or the batch processing? Which is the good? Both systems have their own advantages and disadvantages. We have to decide which is more suitable for us. What we can conclude from this is the transaction processing systems are the operation information systems that process the data resulting from business transaction. It stores and it manipulates the details of every transaction that is happening in a business field or business organization or an enterprise. They involve the basic activities of data entry. That means data entry is the main thing in the TPS. Other things will happen automatically within the information system, but the main thing is how do you do the data entry, okay, or the transaction processing. Once the data entry is done, processing the transaction, storing in files and databases. So we have to decide which is the main concept we need in getting the transaction done. How do you going to store the details with the batch processing or real-time processing? Which is more comfortable? If you are comfortable with computers and you can do immediate entry of the data into the system through online terminal, the real-time processing is a better option. And if you are not very much comfortable with the use of the computers and you feel writing documents or written documents are more comfortable to you, you can follow the batch processing, batch data entry processing, so that whenever you get a time or at the end of the day or end of the week, you'll enter all the details into the computer. So both the transactions or processing is possible, but the thing is, transaction processing system concentrates on entering of the data, processing it and storing it in a database. Alright, so this is all about the transaction processing system. Thank you.